What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome into episode 216 of the CRW podcast, here to talk about WVU completing the football coaching staff. We're going to go over what we believe to be the complete offensive and defensive stat, even go over some of the support staff as well a little bit here in our main segment when we get to it. And then we're going to talk some news updates. Other than that, we got news updates for both sports, really, that's significant. One being a Hall of Famer on the football side, the other being basketball number being retired across all sports, actually honoring the late, great Jerry West. So we'll talk a little bit about that in that side of things. And of course, towards the tail end of the show, we got to talk about that Mountaineer Hoops team because they're having such a successful and impressive season thus far. Can't say enough about the job Darren DeVries is doing. So we'll talk about that. And of course, last week we kind of talked about the transfers. I wanted to focus on the coaches in this one. So like I said, that will kind of be the main segment. But since last week's episode, of course, the day I put it out, I think a couple more transfers came in. And, since that time, 5 more transfers rolled in for West Virginia in the past week. So those should be the final additions as the spring semester has kicked off at WVU, and spring football will be underway here in just a couple of months. The team going through winter workouts. I'm sure you guys have seen them post videos on social media and such of them getting things started there in the Rich Rod 2.0 era with the 2025 version of the squad. A lot of these new guys in tow, a lot of the early enrollees that we discussed last week on campus now as well, going through those workouts. So we'll talk about those 5 other transfer additions, but the main thing we're going to talk about is this coaching staff, and we'll get to that momentarily. But first, let's lead off talking a little bit about some of that WVU news. We may as well start here. We'll bookend the show here with WVU basketball talk here with the news story beginning with WVU basketball, and we'll talk about the team in general and their performance in the latest game. Another huge win at the tail end of this show. But one of the first news topics that we want to talk about prior to that big win that they just pulled off, actually, is that the nation was already honoring Darren DeVries and the amazing job he's done at WVU, coming in, rehauling the entire roster for one, and then you deal with injuries and you have to have a shorthanded roster there, which going into the season was a roster that was lacking length. You don't have a ton of height on this roster, and you're still finding ways to win basketball games with everything that you've overcome, all the obstacles, playing, about only an 8-man rotation, just doing a phenomenal job. And he was recognized with the mid-season Coach of the Year award, the Jim Phelan Award, which is awarded to the best basketball coach nationally mid-season. West Virginia University head coach Darren DeVries is the recipient of Jim Phelan Award mid-season honors. The award is presented annually to the top head coach in Division I college basketball. With just 2.8% of its scoring returning from last season's team, West Virginia picked to finish 13th in the Big 12, but DeVries has the Mountaineers poised to return to the NCAA tournament after a 2-year hiatus. WVU recently broke into the rankings at number 21 in the AP poll, and they're probably going to be back in there. I'm putting this out on Monday, so maybe by the time that you're watching or listening to this, they may already be popping up in the poll again, which made its first appearance in the poll since December 26, 2022. And the Mountaineers are currently number 25 in the coaches poll and number 30 in the net rankings. Darren DeVries is 5-5 against ranked teams during his head coaching career, 3-0 at WVU with wins over Gonzaga, Kansas, Arizona. So you've beaten the number 3 team, number 7 team, number 24 team, and now we can talk about beating the number 2 team, and that's what we'll talk about towards the tail end of the show. But the wins over Gonzaga and Kansas marked the first time the Mountaineers have beaten 2 top 10 teams in the same season since 2005-2006. So something that hasn't been done, he did it in 20 years, in his first time being here. So great job by him, and I think you can only talk about, the great job he's doing now, but what the future holds. That's what really gets you excited, because like we talked about, this is kind of, I don't want to call it a makeshift roster, because obviously there's some amazing pieces that they went out and found and got in this transfer portal, and they did a good job really bringing some guys in. And I think that in the future, you're going to continue to see that coming from the high school ranks, coming from the transfer portal, but they'll have a more full rotation, a more full roster. And if you imagine what he's doing with this, imagine what he can do in the future, especially when you look at something like this, also from the university here. 3 McDonald's All-Americans will be coming into West Virginia next season, and Kelvin Odie, Trent McLean, and Braden Hawthorne, who is absolutely phenomenal. He just got recently upgraded, and he's shooting up the recruiting ranks. In-state guy, but in phenomenal player there at Huntington Prep. But 3 McDonald's All-Americans, I think, is pretty unheard of for WVU. I can only remember 1 McDonald's All-American ever, period, and that was Oscar Sheboy, and that's the only one I can think of. And to have 3 coming in your first recruiting class, yet again, just another amazing job by Darren DeVries. Hopefully West Virginia is able to keep him around. So there's the basketball side of the news updates, but then we got to talk a bit on the football side, and then we got to talk about something that affects all sports. But first, on the football side, Steve Slaton honored by going to the College Football Hall of Fame. I talked about this in a live stream on the YouTube channel recently, which if you're listening on the audio side, be sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or if you're checking this out on WVSportsNow.com, hop over to the Country Roads Webcast YouTube channel. Give us a subscription as well, and we appreciate the guys at WVSportsNow.com for hosting our episode, our friends over there that do great work. This article is, of course, from the university talking about Steve Slaton being inducted in the College Football Hall of Fame, the 2025 class, 7th WVU player ever inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. This press release, of course, coming from WVU. I'll just kind of skim through it. You should definitely read it in its entirety, though, if you haven't yet. Really a lot of good acclaim for Steve Slaton. I'll try and pick out some of the highlights here, including the statement from Coach Rich Rod, which, of course, interestingly enough, back as the head coach of WVU when Steve Slaton gets elected, so that's fitting, right? Says he's so excited for Steve. What a great honor for him. When you look at the years of 2005 through 2007, there was not a better running back in college football than Steve Slaton. When he is inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame in December, it will be a special day for all Mountaineers. It was announced on ESPN's College Football Live. The 18 All-America first-team players and 4 standout coaches in the 2025 class selected from a national ballot of 77 players and 9 coaches, and then 101 players and 34 coaches from the divisional ranks. Of course, there's a statement from Archie Manning. A little bit about Slaton here. An unanimous first-team All-American in 2006. He finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy voting that year and was a finalist for the Doak Walker Award awarded to the nation's best running back as he set the WVU single-season record with 1,744 yards and had 2,104 all-purpose yards. During his 3 years in Morgantown, WVU went 33-5 and finished ranked nationally number 5 in 2005, number 10 in 2006, and number 6 in 2007. A run that included 2 Big East titles in 05 and 07, the winningest 3-year period in WVU history and the second best record in the nation over that 3-year period. Of course, a 3-time all-time Big East performer. Slaton finished his career as WVU's all-time leader in touchdowns, 55 touchdowns, 50 rushing touchdowns in 3 seasons. Got to remember he left after his junior year. He and Pat White, of course, formed one of the most prolific rushing duos in NCAA history, each surpassing 1,000 yards rushing in consecutive seasons as the third pair ever to do so. He finished his career as the NCAA's active leader in points per game with multiple spots in the conference and school record books. And, of course, a little brief NFL career that started off really hot with the Texans, over 1,000 yards there in the NFL. I think would have been a good NFL player if it weren't for injuries that affected him, and he showcased that in his early seasons there with the Texans. But honored forever now as a College Football Hall of Famer, and I think there is actually, here's the list of the players that are in with him and the names and coaches, of course. But the WVU players that are in, he joins the list. The only other WVU College Football Hall of Fame players are Darryl Talley, Joe Stidehar, Ira Rat Rogers, Sam Huff, Major Harris, and Bruce Bosley. Now you can add Steve Slaton's name to that list, but West Virginia does have 5 head coaches in the Hall of Fame, those being Bobby Bowden, Frank Signetti, Alfred Greasy Neal, Don Nealon, and Clarence Doc Spears. So Slaton going to the Hall of Fame, the other piece of news. And then an even bigger, or just as big, I guess you could say, is something that was announced during that recent basketball game that we'll discuss towards the tail end of the show. We knew it was Jerry West Day. He was being honored after his passing, the late, great, greatest Mountaineer ever, as he's been called, and I think rightfully so, of course, with all of his accomplishments. And now it'll be honored even further as Jerry West's famous number 44 will be retired from all WVU athletic competition. So this going across all sports, no one will wear 44 again. As an everlasting tribute to Jerry West, the greatest Mountaineer ever, West Virginia University Vice President and Director of Athletics Ren Baker announced today, of course, this announcement coming on back on January 18th, that the number 44 will be retired by the athletic department in all sports. Currently, the famous number is retired in men's basketball only. After a special vote and subsequent approval by the WVU Athletics Council, Baker has now retired the number 44 in perpetuity for all WVU sports. In honor of West's memory and legacy, no Mountaineer student athlete will ever wear number 44 again. And then we get Ren Baker's statement here. Through his generosity, advice, time, and overall encouragement, Jerry West has always given back to our university and our student athletes, Baker said. He never sought the recognition, but all our student athletes have benefited from his love for his home state and university. When we lost Jerry in June, his legacy while we lost Jerry in June, his legacy will continue to touch and enhance the lives of our student athletes through scholarships, our academic center in the Coliseum, and his overall vision to compete and represent the West Virginia jersey with pride. He was proud of his alma mater, and number 44 will always stand for excellence here at WVU. There will never be another Jerry West. So excellent statement there and an excellent decision by Wren Baker to retire number 44 across all sports there, as that kind of wraps up what I wanted to talk about on the news side of things. But like I said, excellent decision there by Wren Baker. And of course, we all miss Jerry West, the late, greatest Mountaineer ever. But I think poetic justice that West Virginia had such an amazing performance against one of the best basketball teams in the nation thus far this season when it was Jerry West Day honoring him. And like I said, we'll talk about that game momentarily. But a great decision by Wren Baker, who always seems to have his head in the right place with every decision that he's made here at WVU thus far for the most part, right? And I think that we could all be like Wren Baker and try and have our head in the right place. And one of the best ways to potentially do that is Magic Mind, guys. I'm telling you, ever since I've found Magic Mind, you guys know I've always promoted it here. I've always been a big fan of it. Take it every day, and it gives you great focus. You'll have that mental clarity. You'll feel relaxed, but it also doesn't make you jittery. It's not like an energy drink or an energy shot or anything like that. It's something that's natural, all natural ingredients tested by doctors. And it is also really good for other people as well. They donate to mental health charities with each bottle purchased. It's time-released caffeine, so it hits you throughout the day. You don't just get that one burst and then a crash. And you can take it, of course, with your coffee, which you guys know always a big thing for me, as much as you guys see me drinking coffee on the show. So that's big, and I've been using that product for a long time. But then here recently, they just came out with the Magic Mind Sleep product, which I think is super beneficial as well. And since I've got the 24-hour pack and been combining the two, it's been even more effective, and I've seen a great boost in my daily activity on my 9-to-5 job here, recording videos, editing videos. Everything just seems like it's a lot smoother because my focus is better and I can work for longer periods of time, not only because of the Magic Mind that I've always taken daily, but also now because it's helping me get great sleep at night. Because I know you guys are like me, every now and again you get those times where you get that insomnia hitting a little bit and you're just having to throw something on the TV, you're tossing and turning, your mind's racing, you can't get to sleep, or maybe then you finally do get to sleep, you wake up in the middle of the night. We've all been there, right? So you take Magic Mind Sleep before you go to sleep at night, before you lay down, and I promise you, you'll sleep through the night, you'll go to sleep quick, tossing and turning, and it's great sleep, and that's a big key. When you talk about mental wealth that we've talked about in the past here, you got to invest in that, and the way to invest in that is twofold. Good performance through your day, good focus, good mental clarity, but of course you got to get the great sleep at night to go along with it. And luckily for you, you can get both of those things with the 24-hour pack that I've been taking here, and that's what I'm talking about with you guys here, is both of those things, the Magic Mind and the Magic Mind Sleep. And we can get it for you for 45% off here on the Country Roads Webcast. All you got to do is use our link, and that is https, of course, magicmind.com/countryroadsjan. That's Country Roads JAN. So magicmind.com/countryroadsjan, and you can get the Magic Mind bundle for 45% off. Invest in your mental wealth. Keep your head on straight, just like Wren Baker's had his head on straight with a lot of the decisions he's made here at WVU. Can't recommend Magic Mind enough, guys, and get it from us here with a discount at the Country Roads Webcast. And speaking of having your head on straight, did Wren Baker not have his head on straight when he was formulating this WVU football coaching staff? I've been just impressed by it, as I have been the transfers. So let's talk a bit about the WVU football coaching staff, which we believe now to be complete. That's why this episode is titled WVU Completes the Coaching Staff. Maybe, because you never know what other hires may be popping up on there. And I'm going to share with you guys my list, but this list is not really, a complete list either. I don't have, all the scouting departments, all the front office listed, just kind of the main, additions. Of course, I wanted to have the complete offensive and defensive staffs, but then I threw in some of the new additions to the front office and support staff that I think people would be curious about. But maybe one day we'll try and share a complete list when we get closer to the season, when we know it's fully done, because I think the list I have now is well over 30 some names already on this. So we're probably talking 50 plus if we were to go through everything, including the support staff, nutrition, athletic trainers, all of that stuff. So I'm not including all that on the list, but you'll get what you want to know about probably here as we talk about the complete WVU football coaching staff for 2025. Let's take a look here, guys, as we pursue through episode 216 here on the CRW podcast. Okay, so let's start with the support, / front office staff is what I've titled this section, and then we'll go over, what you guys probably are really wanting to see, the offense and defensive staff in its entirety, and talk a bit about those guys. But let's start here with Chuck Lilly, who was hired as the general manager coming over from Oklahoma, where he was assistant GM there. So, West Virginia doing a good job, not only, stealing Zach Alley from Oklahoma, but also stealing Chuck Lilly, who, as you can see, I think by the transfer portal class that we talked about last episode, and that's why I think it's kind of good that we did it in this order, went over the transfer portal class, which we still have some more impressive additions to talk about with that, which we will talk about in the next segment here on the show. But West Virginia really doing a great job, and you get to see kind of the faces behind that with us going over the transfers last season and now the staff this week. Some of the people that have really helped bring in some of those guys are really involved here on this, for support front office staff. And of course, Chuck Lilly kind of overseeing all that, the scouting, the acquisitions, all of that stuff. He's kind of over that, and he's done a great job already in his brief time at WVU with the amazing job they've done in the transfer portal, which we can't speak highly enough. And I think getting him was a great addition to come over as the GM. We know Fabianich was the GM previously. When that hire was made, a lot of people were excited about it, and I think there were some good things that went along with it. He did have some really good finds. You think about Beanie Bishop, but I think a lot of the previous staff, to their detriment, one of the main things was they really misscouted, misidentified players, or tried to take players that really played a role of some type at the previous school and try and put them into a different role at WVU, and it just didn't work out. And I think that with Chuck Lilly, what we're seeing thus far is really finding players that seem like they're going to fit the scheme directly, and they translate, what they were doing previously to what they're doing now. Plus, even so going as far as getting players that have ties to different coaches on your staff, so they know what they're getting in those guys. So I think they've done a really good job. And Chuck Lilly's done a great job as general manager already, and I'm sure that's going to continue when we get into the spring transfer portal window, when we're talking, building the 2026 recruiting class, all of that stuff he's going to be involved in, of course. And I know there was some question. The next up, of course, Mike Joseph is indeed returning as, of course, and remaining at WVU. He's been here since, 2008 now, I believe, so we're talking nearly 20 years through, 3 or 4 coaching staffs now. Mike Joseph will stay on. Titles seem to be remaining assistant athletic director and head coach for strength and conditioning are his titles. They are listed on the WVU sports site currently, and he will be joined by someone that we were all hoping to see join him, a West Virginia native, Parker Whiteman, and his title is assistant head strength coach and director of skill development for football. So going to play a big role in that strength and development, that developing that hard edge here that they're already going through, as we talked about here in winter workouts, and I think you'll see a great job there. That's one thing that everyone that's been a previous player has talked about. You've heard, Pat McAfee and them on the Pat McAfee show even call it going through the tour of duty, so to speak, at WVU because of how hard this is. I know Whitey on the Old Grad podcast, which shout out to those guys, they do a great job. Whitey Williams, the older brother of Reed Williams, talked about when Rich Rod came in 2001, and when they hit winter workouts, I think he said within the first week they lost, I believe it was at least 12 scholarship players. So don't be surprised if we see some names, leave after the spring and, or going into the spring after winter workouts. But, that's part of this process of weeding them out and building this hard edge culture that they're trying to form here at WVU. And of course, the strength and conditioning plays a big part in that, because it's not only forming the hard edge, but it's also forming that spot the ball culture that we talk about, where we're going to play this up tempo, fast style. The way that you have to play that is everyone on your team has to be conditioned, even your linemen. And a lot of those big guys, sometimes they don't like to run. So sometimes those guys, maybe some of the ones that get weeded out, we'll see what happens there. But West Virginia's done a good job bringing in a lot of depth at a lot of spots. And I think that's why you've seen them bring in a lot of transfers. People have been wondering why we're bringing in so many at this position or that position. Well, I think it's because maybe they're expecting, hey, some of these guys may not make it. We need to be prepared for that possibility. And of course, we have the spring portal window as well. If we see that, and we can not only have some guys that may want to leave on their own, but we may see some guys that we identify and say, hey, I don't know if you're going to fit here. But of course, going through this strength and development, part of the winter workouts is going to play a big part of the future success we're hoping to see in 2025, and Mike Joseph and Parker Whiteman are, of course, a part of that. And then, of course, Dusty Rutledge is back. I mean, we made the official announcement on a live stream and covered that, as we've covered all of these official announcements on the show, but we knew that was coming. He's been at Rich Rod, with Rich Rod since, Glenville State, 30-plus years, I believe. Always been the chief of staff. You saw him walking around, with Rich Rod in the introductory videos that the university put out, so he's been there, but of course, they wanted to roll out kind of some of the announcements, even though some of these guys have been here a long time. Dusty Rutledge being one of those, Cole Dial being another one that's been here a long time. So, of course, Dusty Rutledge returns to WVU. And then Cole Dial, named Assistant Athletic Director of Football Operations, I believe is the title there, or for football operations. We've talked about him, a long time ago, because he was one that was in place very early on when Rich Rod first got here, and I think he was, of course, one that was helping, call a lot of these transfers before they made, some of the hires, of the general manager and maybe of some of the defensive staff, and before getting Zach Alley, he was the one probably helping out a lot, getting that done there, and you got to shout out to Cole Dial, who's done a great job with this transfer portal class as well, and I also wanted to at least put, one member of the scouting staff on there that's been in place nearly as long, because those guys have done a hell of a job helping identify those players that West Virginia should go out and target, and picking up these transfers and being a part of this great job that West Virginia has done in this transfer portal cycle. And friend of the show, Tyler Lesick, of course, is the one that I wanted to put on here. Arlesick. I always worried if I'm butchering the pronunciation there, but scouting team's done a great job, and there's a ton of new additions there. Don't have, of course, for brevity's sake and for, everything, don't have time to list them all here. Like I said, maybe in the future, either on a video on the YouTube channel or on a podcast, maybe we'll list the entire scouting department, everything, once it's all fully shown on the staff, but they've done a great job as well. And then, of course, Rasheed Marshall, staying at WVU. We know he retired under the Neil Brown regime. Been here, he's been a part of, even the media side of things, being the kind of model for the jersey reveals each week, which has been really cool to see as well. But Rasheed Marshall, of course, staying on, kind of the original Rich Rod quarterback there, if you will, in his first stint. And that's kind of a thing coming full circle. And it was a really cool moment to see those two reunited in kind of the Rich Rod return videos as well. But Rasheed Marshall, Director of Player Relations, is his title there in the support/front office staff. So there is that. Let's go up here and talk a bit about the offensive staff and then the defensive staff now, as we're talking about the complete WVU coaching staff here on episode 216 of the CRW podcast. So offensive coaches, Jack Bicknell, the offensive line coach, is one I'm really excited about, because I think that it was a surprising hire, and when we talked about it a lot, that's one thing that we kind of termed it when me and Steven talked about it, was probably the most surprising hire on the WVU staff, because it was not one that was expected. We were all expecting Rick Trickett to come, and then we learned, okay, that's not happening. He's going to stay at Jack State. And then we were maybe saying, we're going to be able to try and get Garen Justice from SMU. And then, that ended up not being the thing. And then Jack Bicknell pops up, and it's a name that not a lot of us at WVU fans were really familiar with, but it's a coach that has a ton of experience, been at a multiple Power 5 programs, Power 4 programs, whatever you want to call it, including Ole Miss in 2019, when that's where the connection with Rich Rod was, and he was the offensive line coach, and Rich Rod was the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss in 2019, and that year they had great success together, and that's probably what drew Rich Rod to wanting to, work with him again. He said, hey, our offense worked great together before. That year they were number 6 in rushing in college football, over 250 rushing yards per game that year they worked together. And like I said, he's been at multiple Power 5 programs. He has, multiple NFL stops, coached the Steelers offensive line at one point, was assistant offensive line coach with the Giants in the NFL. So a lot of experience you're bringing in with Jack Bicknell. So it was a hire that may have surprised some people, but good stats behind it. And I think what you're looking at with this staff in a lot of ways is you've mixed guys that have ties to Rich Rod, that have, that high experience level, have been in the coaching ranks for a long time, 20 plus years of experience like Coach Rod has, and older names. And you mix that with some young up and coming names on the staff as well. And I like that mix for Rich Rod of guys that, have West Virginia ties, that of course have ties to him, guys that are older and experienced, and then some young guys that I think really have bright futures. And a couple of those right here were kind of announced together in a lot of ways, or at least we learned of them together before the official announcement started rolling out. And both these guys coming over from Jack State, and Ryan Garrett, the wide receivers coach, and then Michael Nicewonder, the tight ends coach. Michael Nicewonder, someone people probably remember, they called him Highway 46 at Alabama. He opened up lanes in the running game for Derrick Henry when they were making, national title runs there under Coach Saban, and he's since became a great coach of his own, coaching kind of the tight ends / H-backs in the Rich Rod offense, which are big. They were big previously and created great running lanes blocking, roles and creating great running lanes in the Rich Rod offense when he was first here. But I think even more so from what I've watched of Jack State last season, there's a lot of, 2 tight end sets to create, extra gaps for the defense to account for. Of course, they've already got to account for the quarterback in the run game as well. And Michael Nicewonder did a lot of good job coaching those guys, because they were really opening up a lot of great holes, as we saw how successful the Jack State rushing offense was, as to be suspected, in a Rich Rod scheme. and you're bringing in guys that he's worked with at this level already, which is nice. And I think Ryan Garrett coming in and receivers coach is big because, I talked about this with the addition of Cam Vaughn as a wide receiver, and I put a tweet out about it on social media that got pretty good traction, and I think some people realized, okay, wow, I didn't notice that because I hadn't noticed it myself either, and that's that Cam Vaughn, who was a wide receiver that Ryan Garrett helped mold into a wide receiver, actually. He was a quarterback coming out of high school, red shirts for a year. They helped mold him into the receiver, and then his redshirt freshman year has over 800 yards receiving, which is significant because if you go back and look through the Neil Brown era, no wide receiver had 800 yards receiving. And so you're bringing in a redshirt freshman in Cam Vaughn that, that did that, so he's going to help with that, and you're bringing in the guy that helped mold him into that type of receiver. And Ryan Garrett and also played a part and maybe is the reason you get him. So I like both of these additions, which are more on the side that is, those young additions that I'm talking about that have a high ceiling when you're mixing up this coaching staff with young and older names. And another young name that obviously we're familiar with is Rhett Rod, son of Coach Rich Rod, of course, is going to be the quarterback's coach. And I think some people have wanted to say, oh, this is a nepotism hire, but I disagree on that because I think when you look at the path of Rhett Rod, it follows, similar path of coaches, that have done this before. You look at who was just, quarterback's coach for WVU, Tyler Allen. And what did he do? He went from, kind of a grad assistant role, was a young guy, then, kept getting promotions and then gets the quarterback's coach role last season for WVU. Red Rodriguez just followed the similar path. He was a quarterback, throughout college, becomes student assistant, becomes a grad assistant, becomes an analyst, an assistant kind of, coach with, the expanded roles last season where you can have, umpteen coaches on your staff, as West Virginia, of course, is taking advantage of here, as we'll see some specialized position roles, especially on the defensive side here. But then, of course, the next step there is kind of being, a position coach, and quarterbacks is what fits. And I think this is not a bad move, actually, because Rhett Rodriguez has played in Rich Rod's offense. He knows what to expect from him. He's been around the offense his whole life as well. And then, of course, having played it and played the position of quarterback, I think he can work good with those. And also, you get another young guy, and having those young guys, you can't speak enough to what that helps for in recruiting to be able to relate to the recruits more especially when you have a mix of young and old on your staff. So I like the addition of Rhett Rodriguez as quarterback's coach. And then running backs coach and inside receivers, we get our two coaches that were rehired for WVU, those being Blaine Stewart, of course, and Chad Scott. I think Blaine Stewart was probably the most expected one that we thought Rich Rod may retain, and Chad Scott was probably the one that we all hoped for the most and didn't look like that one was going to happen for a while, but ends up happening later in the process, which was big, and I think was one of the reasons, according to Jaheim White himself in a video that I think was kind of going around on social media that he put out on Instagram, was one of the reasons he returned to WVU. And Chad Scott's done a phenomenal job developing running backs, identifying running backs that were kind of hidden gems and bringing them in throughout his time in the Neil Brown era. And I think he'll fit in a Rich Rod coaching staff as well because he's a high energy guy and a player favorite and a fan favorite. So you love Chad Scott coming back. And you could say all those same things about Blaine Stewart, who, was around the Rich Rod culture as well, growing up with, of course, the late, great Bill Stewart being his father and him being a part of that. And I think that's one cool thing about this staff that you'll see when you see, the Travis Trickett's, the Blaine Stewarts, the Rhett Rods, and then some names on the defensive staff like the Jake Castiles. You see guys that were around this program a lot in Rich Rod's first tenure getting spots on the staff now, so they know what to expect and, what it was required for success with Rich Rod at the helm, which is nice. And Blaine Stewart, of course, moving from where he was previously tight ends coach in the Neil Brown staff to now inside receivers coach, which will probably be a significant position in the Rich Rod offense. And you can see him put up a tweet previously talking about the inside receiver legacy at WVU, which is very true. Darius Raynaud, Jock Sanders, Tavon Austin. So now guys like Rodney Gallagher, Dom Collins, guys that you're bringing in like Man Singleton, etc. Gerard Bowie are guys that are going to have chances to, be a part of that inside receiver legacy. And then the most recent addition to the coaching staff, the one that we were kind of waiting on, what kind of stands out to me here is that no one gets the offensive coordinator title, which I guess isn't surprising because Rich Rod is calling the plays and we all knew that, right? But in the past, he's had someone with the offensive coordinator title, and a lot of coaches that do call the plays still do give someone an offensive coordinator title. And when the staff was nearly complete and no one had it, and Travis Trickett hadn't been announced, but then that one got reported, I was kind of expecting maybe, hey, he's going to get the OC title. What else is left? There's really no position titles for him to get. Instead, they kind of went with this specialized title of senior offensive assistant. You'll see someone on the defensive staff got that title as well. And both of these hires that were brought in with these senior, assistant titles on each side of the ball are guys that were coordinators at their previous stops, and successful coordinators at that for the most part, especially the one on the defensive side. Travis Trickett, you can speak to what you want about his success on the coordinator side, but he is a phenomenal recruiter, and that's why he's actually one of the hires that I'm more excited about, because the last time he was here, he did a great job recruiting Georgia, South Florida. West Virginia's going to have in-ways there in the South again, in Florida and Georgia, and I think you'll see recruiting there be on an uptick here in the Rich Rod era, and Travis Trickett's going to be a part of that. But I think what this hire shows is it shows what the Zach Alley hire shown, what some of these big transfer portal additions, what some more of those we'll talk about momentarily in the next segment, but that West Virginia really has this money that was reported to be, a big reason that Rich Rod would be the right hire, because the money that would come along with it that wouldn't be tied to anyone else. And you've seen that with the way they formulated the coaching staff, going out and making splash hires. And I think you can call it a splash hire as well when you're able to get multiple guys, pay them enough money to where they're leaving coordinator roles. I know Travis Trickett wasn't, currently a coordinator. He had, lost his job at Coastal Carolina, I believe. But the other one on the defensive side was a sitting defensive coordinator, and over for a couple stops, and you're able to bring in guys that were coordinator roles and give them senior assistant titles because you're able to pay them so nice because the money's there for Rich Rod and company, and that just shows how strong this staff is that you're able to do something like that. And there's a lot of specialized positions that are going to be on the staff. I only listed a few of these here. There may be some more. I wasn't quite sure of how many names that were still remaining on that coaching staff were from the previous regime that may not currently be employed at WVU. So I just listed the ones on this staff that I was 100% sure of, the ones that got official announcements recently, and those final ones here on the offensive side before we wrap up the coaching staff talk here by talking about the defensive coaches were Derek Dressler, assistant offensive line coach, who of course has ties to WVU. I think he even has ties to Concord, which is funny enough for me being a Mercer County resident down here in the bottom part of the state. But Derek Dressler, assistant offensive line coach, and I'm really excited about this hire because he's a guy that I think has a really bright future to potentially be a great offensive line coach in the future in his own right if he ever gets the full-time position. And, maybe when you bring in a veteran like Jack Bicknell, that's maybe a bridge to potentially that being something to happen in the future, is maybe Derek Dressler taking over that role. We'll see what happens. But the reason I say that is because he has great experience when you look at his bio and you go read through it at the stops he's been at, despite being young, kind of similar to, what we talked about with some of these other coaches on the staff. Despite being young, they have great experience under their belts already, and a lot of really smart coaches on this staff with, multiple degrees and everything. And we'll talk even more about that when we talk about the defensive staff. But Derek Dressler, what I really like about him is the people that he's been able to learn under are coaches that have been well-versed at the college level and have been very successful at the college level. We're talking about Rick Trickett, one of the most well-known offensive line coaches in college football, been successful everywhere he's been, WVU, Florida State, you can name all the stops, and he's been successful at every one of them. Now at Jack State, doing great things there despite being up in age, but he's learned from him, a very experienced offensive line coach, and now gets to come work with Jack Bicknell Jr., who we talked about, similar story, similar case, someone that's been coaching offensive line for a long time. And I think that's really even gives Derek Dressler more upside here as the assistant offensive line coach. And probably the most exciting, I think, analyst hire and maybe in WVU history, assistant coach hire in WVU history that, really made me feel a little bit older because, of course, I watched the Noel Devine play when I was, late in my high school years there. But Noel Devine coming back to WVU as an offensive analyst and assistant running backs coach. They're going to be working along Chad Scott. And maybe the same thing could be said for Noel Devine here, even if he's ever, he's getting into the coaching ranks now as an analyst. And, of course, he can learn under a great running backs coach who has a vast experience there at that. Doing the most similar things we were talking about there about Bicknell and Trickett on the offensive line. Chad Scott, great experience as a college football coach, multiple stops, coordinator roles, running back coach roles, other roles on offense as well. So he can really show Noel Devine the ropes, and hopefully Noel Devine's someone with a great upside, and I think came back to WVU to get his degree recently, and that's how this is a possibility for him and getting into the coaching ranks. It's nice to see Noel Devine. A lot of people wanted former Mountaineers on this staff, and you do get one in Noel Devine as the assistant running backs coach. And I know some of the other names that popped up, maybe people were hoping to see. they didn't get to see. But hey, let's not forget that a lot of these names on this staff are up-and-comers. There's going to be turnover, so you can't rule out, other future Mountaineers maybe coming back. But Noel Devine is one that's really exciting here as we wrap up talking about the offensive staff. What's really excited about a lot of those names, I think if I had to point out my favorite hire on the staff, it would probably go to Travis Trickett just because of the recruiting aspect of it that I think it could, imply. Other than that, Noel Devine's an exciting one, and Derek Dressler, maybe the two probably most underrated ones that could have potential high ceilings for the future. So, I think you got to talk about that. And, of course, Chad Scott being retained, I think, is huge news. That one is big in and alone because of the Jaheim White stuff that's tied to it. So just kind of my thoughts there in the offensive staff. And then let's wrap up here talking about the coaching staff by discussing the defensive staff, which defense and special teams here, will tie those both in together. But Zach Alley, you have to lead the discussion off here. We've talked about it in the past, but you can't say enough good things and wax poetic enough about Zach Alley, one of the most highly regarded defensive coordinators in college football, especially as far as being young and up and coming. Has not been in the coaching ranks long. He's younger than I am, younger than probably most of you watching and listening to this podcast, as I believe he's only 31, 32. I think he's only 31, 30 or 31, something along those lines. But assistant head coach, gets that title / defensive coordinator and linebackers coach, coming over from Oklahoma. So first of all, when have you ever seen West Virginia have the money and the ability to be able to steal a coach from a borderline blue blood program and a Power 4 program? And Zach Alley has been successful every stop that he's been at: ULM, Jack State, Oklahoma. You listen to their people talk about it, and it's their best defense they've had in almost 15 years was the one with him at the helm calling the plays for them this past season. Can't say enough good things about him. And, one thing that I think's been pointed out by others is Zach Alley is not only, a great football mind, knows the game well, he's just a brilliant person in general. I think I heard someone say he had like a 32 on his ACT or something like that. So maybe a literal genius we're talking about here in Zach Alley, who's also learned under some really great coaches, came up at Clemson. That's where he cut his teeth, where he had the ties to Brent Venables, which is how he ended up at Oklahoma last year. So, under Dabo Sweeney, under Brent Venables. And then, of course, we'll see some guys on the staff that has ties to him that will also have, similar ties to that Clemson staff. It's funny how much that Clemson staff and Oklahoma staff ended up having ties here to the WVU staff here in 2025 with the Zach Alley stuff. But Clemson, and then, of course, the ties to Rich Rod come in when Rich Rod was the offensive coordinator at ULM and Zach Alley was the defensive coordinator at ULM and was the youngest defensive coordinator in college football then. Then Rich Rod decides to hire him as his defensive coordinator at Jack State to do such a good job in 2023 that he gets hired at Oklahoma last year. But West Virginia able to lure him away. One of the best hires assistant-wise, I think, in WVU history, because he's the highest paid assistant in WVU football history with his contract details that have since come out. So Zach Alley, can't say enough good things about that. And then I think to go along with it, the defense that Zach Alley likes to run is a little bit of 3-3-5 based, which of course ties back into the Rich Rod previous era, but also he mixes it up, runs a little 4-2-5. But someone that can help him with that 3-3-5 stuff is someone that back into coaching now after, I guess, about a year or so out, and that's Jeff Castile, who we saw be a defensive analyst in the Neil Brown staff a little bit. But, of course, the main success came with Rich Rod, and when those two guys were paired together, it was, magic for Mountaineer Nation as the defensive coordinator of that great run that we talked about a little bit when we were talking about Steve Slaton being inducted in the Hall of Fame earlier. But he's coming back to West Virginia to be the Bandits coach, and this one we can talk a little bit about kind of these specialized positions that we're seeing on this staff. And one of those is the Bandits coach, which I think will be kind of an outside linebacker position that may be one of the latest transfer additions that the Mountaineers have brought in. Like I said, that we'll talk about in the next segment, and maybe one of the most important transfer portal additions may be playing that Bandit position. But Jeff Castile, can't speak highly enough of him. Obviously, his experience speaks for itself, and him being able to work with Zach Alley and talk a little bit about, how to be successful as a defensive coordinator at WVU. Not that Zach Alley needs, any tutelage on how to be a successful defensive coordinator, but I'm sure he can pick Jeff Castile's brain about a lot of things with the previous success he had at WVU, previous success he had at WVU alongside Rich Rod. So I think that's a great addition to the staff is Jeff Castile. And another great addition was Gabe Franklin coming in as safeties coach. Previously was at Boise State as a cornerbacks coach, I think back in 2021, did a great job there. He was also a great cornerback in his own right when he played the position, so great, job working with defensive backs. And what I love about this defensive staff as we're talking about, bringing in guys for specialized positions is it's pretty much the complete polar opposite of the way the Mountaineers tried to do the secondary last year. You saw West Virginia try and have one coach, pretty much the entire secondary and then just have some assistant roles to try and fill in with it. What you're seeing on the defensive side this year is more specialized roles in that secondary. Safeties coach, cornerbacks coach. We even got a nickels coach that we'll talk about down the line here. But Gabe Franklin, I think, will be a really good addition as the safeties coach. Was also a good recruiter when he was doing that there at Boise State. So I like the addition of Gabe Franklin. And then William Green was one of the first hires that we learned about. And I think this came a couple of days finally out officially before the Zach Alley hire, which really was something that really started to make people's, spidey sense tingle and say, hey, maybe this is pointing towards Zach Alley because, William Green has ties, worked with Zach Alley, and, if he's being hired in defensive staff, members are starting to pop up, and this one has ties to Zach Alley. Maybe they're trying to work out a deal with Zach Alley behind the scenes, or maybe it's already in the works, and he's already picking out a defensive line coach. They're going to start picking out some others, which he has. A lot of these coaches have ties to Zach Alley. Gabe Franklin at Boise State. Zach Alley spent time at Boise State. I talked about his vast amount of experience despite being young. I mentioned Clemson and his coordinator stops. Also didn't mention, Boise State. Even a internship with the Carolina Panthers, I believe it was, somewhere in the NFL there. I want to say it was the Panthers. And so, ties to Boise State, that's where the Gabe Franklin comes in. But the William Green was the defensive line coach at Jack State, of course, the past couple of seasons. He's coming over to West Virginia, joining Zach Alley's defense. And then same goes for Pat Kirkland, who was on that Jack State staff, but also has West Virginia ties previously, was on Rich Rod's staff in the past, of course, in his first go-round, but now had been on the Jack State staff, and now comes here as a special teams coordinator, which I think is great to see. I think he's done a great job doing that, and of course has a title of defensive assistant coach as well. So Pat Kirkland coming over from that Jack State staff. And then as we continue to talk about the secondary, I think a big addition was Rod West as cornerbacks coach. And I think West Virginia was able to snag him because of the coaching change that went on at Appalachian State. He was on Sean Clark's staff, who of course is a West Virginia native, so maybe he put in a good word for Rod West as well, but I don't think he really would need to. I think Rod West's resume speaks for itself. Here's a guy that not only has great success coaching cornerbacks, which we'll talk about one of the cornerbacks that he coached here in a minute when we talk about those 5 recent transfer portal additions, and having ties to Rod West is a reason that we landed one of those late additions. But he's had great success with cornerbacks, but he's also been a recruiting coordinator at previous stops as well. Every stop he's been at, I think he was at Richmond for a while. He was a defensive pass game coordinator there as well. So as multiple titles that he's had, multiple roles, and I think ties in yet again to West Virginia being able to have great money to be able to bring in for these coaches, because having a guy that was, pass game coordinator, defensive pass game coordinator at a couple of stops, and then just give him a cornerbacks coach role here only shows the money that the raise you're able to give him to just do that. And I think Rod West, with a great recruiting prowess, is really going to help this staff as well, having previously had recruiting coordinator title roles as well. So I love the addition of Rod West. And then Jake Castile. I think I kind of teed this one up a little bit and teased it when we talked about some of the other hires on the offensive staff. But as I mentioned, it's great to have guys that have been around this program, seen how it operates with, whether it was their fathers or people tied to them when they were around the program in the past. And obviously that ties into Jake Castile, but don't sleep on this hire either. He's been very successful as a defensive analyst throughout his career, multiple stops on Rich Rod's staff, under his dad, Jeff Castile, and now they get to work together at WVU, which I'm sure is pretty cool for them as well. So, of course, love Jake Castile coming in. And then Chris Herring staying on is a great move. That's one of the retainments here on this side. Was on the staff last year under Neil Brown, obviously known as being one of the linebackers on that great 1988 squad that played for a national championship at WVU. But he's the assistant special teams coordinator, so he'll be helping out Pat Kirkland with West Virginia special teams in 2025. Another great retainment. And then we get to talk about some of those specialist positions here at the end. And the last one, of course, ties into what I talked about with Travis Trickett. We'll get to it momentarily. But first, I think Henry Weinreich is interesting because here's a guy that, as we talked about with a lot of other members on this staff, is a borderline genius. This is a guy with a chemistry degree, and multiple degrees like a lot of these coaches have. Maybe The ties to Zach Alley are there, as well with the staff. He was at Jack State, I think, as an analyst. Now gets to be the nickel/Sam's coach here at WVU. So as we talked about the secondary here, specializing safeties coach, cornerbacks coach, and a nickels coach. So he's going to be working with, probably, Jordy Scruggs that we suspect, and some of these other defensive backs that West Virginia brought in that are going to be playing that slot position, that nickel position that's pretty much going to be constantly on the field when you have 5 defensive backs on the field pretty much at all time, whether West Virginia's going 3 down or 4 down. So, Henry Weinreich's going to play a good part in this staff, and this is definitely one of those young up-and-comers that we're talking about on the staff when we're talking about that great mix of guys with a lot of experience and some young up-and-coming guys. This is one that's young and up-and-coming, but I'm interested to see how it pans out because he's definitely a very smart individual that seems to be, on a really good career path out here. So I like the addition of Henry Weinreich as the nickels coach. And lastly, I think this is one of the most recent additions other than probably Travis Trickett that was announced. But I like that they were both, announced during similar times because they have similar titles. And the way the West Virginia is able to bring them in, like I said, shows the great job and the great staff that they're able to build and the money that was behind it. They're able to do stuff like this because Andrew Warwick was a very successful defensive coordinator at multiple stops in the past. Recently at Wofford as the defensive coordinator there. So you have a guy who has been a sitting defensive coordinator at multiple stops, and you're able to bring him in, not even just for really a potential position role as he's only assistant linebackers coach because Zach Alley is the main linebackers coach, but he has the ties to Zach Alley. But a great bio, of course, and he was at Jack State previously, but most recently, like I said, was at Wofford as co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach there at Wofford. So you get coaches that were coordinators and you're able to bring them in with senior, titles, and you're able to give them, probably pay raises or, similar pay to what they were making as coordinators, at least, I'm sure, to give them, senior defensive analyst / assistant linebacker coach titles here for Andrew Warwick, which I think is a really good addition. Andrew Warwick was one of those ones that, like I said, ties into that Clemson tree there with Brent Venables and Dabo Sweeney, been tied to Zach Alley and has a history with him for a long time. Another one that's really extremely smart, and I think that this is an underrated addition. When I talked about the offensive side, I mentioned my most underrated addition. I think that Andrew Warwick is the most underrated diamond in the rough addition here on the defensive side. But of course, the main hire here, it can't not be Zach Alley. Zach Alley gets the title of assistant head coach, / defensive coordinator and linebackers, and I think that's fitting because that's pretty much essentially what he is. We know the offense is Rich Rod's, and we know that he has obviously a history of success there. And Zach Alley, boom, you got full keys to this defense. It's all yours. You're no longer a co-DC. Yes, you were calling the plays at Oklahoma, but now you're just essentially head coach of the defense. This is your baby, and I think that's going to pay off dividends for West Virginia. He may not be at WVU for a long time because this is a guy that's on a path. He's a shooting star on a rocket ship to eventually be a head coach in college football, I'm sure. But Zach Alley, while he's here, hopefully it's going to be a fun ride. And if it's anything like when Jeff Castile and Rich Rod worked together, with of course having Jeff Castile on the other side, which I think is a good hire, we could be seeing one of the better defenses at WVU because defense was an issue in both the Neil Brown and Dana Holgerson eras. So if they can right the defense, I think the offense is going to be in good shape with Rich Rod at the helm, so it could be a big thing there. And I think the staff is in place to help that happen, and that staff has brought in some really good transfers that I think are going to help reshape that defense, and that's what I want to talk about now, guys, is the other 5 transfer additions that West Virginia added. Since our last episode, you thought the Mountaineers were done. Oh, no, they were not. But before we talk about those 5 additions, there was one guy that decided to withdraw from the class. So if you were following the tally, the 5 additions would have brought it up to 31. You removed Davion Walker, you're at 30 transfer additions currently, which, hey, funny enough, got to pat myself on the shoulder a little bit, pat myself on the back a little bit for that one because when I told you guys I thought West Virginia would bring in 30 to 40 players in the transfer portal, already have brought in 30 in this cycle, and I believe, you could see about 10 more, at least, especially depending on who leaves after, throughout the spring in the next transfer portal cycle after spring football. But previously committed JUCO wide receiver Davion Walker decided to withdraw his commitment, so he's no longer on the transfer portal tracker that we've been using here on the CRW, which I'll pull up now to discuss the 5 additions that joined the class most recently since our last episode, which of course I've been updating these on the YouTube side, which if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should be. I put out videos and done live streams on pretty much each one of these, and there's content out there almost daily on the YouTube channel, so it's more than just the podcast episodes you get weekly or semi-weekly here on this side of things. But do appreciate you guys listening on the audio side, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, you name it, you can find us there. If you're listening there, leave us a rating, preferably a 5-star one. That really helps us a ton. But also, those of you that are watching on the video version, whether it be on our YouTube channel or the WVU Sports Now channel, if you hit the thumbs up button, give the video a like, that helps us out a lot with the YouTube algorithm. And be sure you're subscribed here for future Mountaineer football coverage. But want to keep you guys up to date on these transfers here on the podcast side of things as well. So do got to talk about these 5 recent additions that I have covered in the past. Of course, it started, I think, the day that I put out the episode last Monday. Tykees Crawford, an offensive lineman that I think is going to have a chance to start at WVU, coming over from the SEC at Arkansas, where he had started there a lot of games, joins there. West Virginia needed to add offensive linemen. That's what a lot of people wanted in the final, slew of transfers they brought in. They bring in several, and also Justin Terry, who had previously entered the portal for WVU, decides to stay. So you bring in really 5 offensive linemen. You bring in 4 transfers, and Justin Terry withdraws from the portal. And Tykees Crawford, I think, is one of those linemen that will have a chance to start. Max Brown, a quarterback, joining the fold, which, interestingly enough, I know a lot of people have said that this maybe not the best addition because a lot of people are looking at his stats, looking at his ratings. But I think the offense was really not that great at Charlotte last year. And this was an addition for me that I thought was really funny and almost was like, what? We really added him? Because I'm sure some of you guys play College Football 25. I do an online dynasty with guys. And in that online dynasty, you start as like a 1-star program. So I'd selected Charlotte as mine, funny enough. And that's where Max Brown played out this past season. So in my online dynasty, I had him as my quarterback for a couple of seasons. And he is a guy that I had great success running the football with. So obviously a quarterback that can run the football, has potential in a rich rod offense, and he's a guy with, a little bit more eligibility remaining. So maybe he's a guy that could also develop. And don't sleep on it though, because a lot of people slept on the addition of Tyler Huff at Jack State, weren't expecting him to be the QB that won the job there, and he ends up being the one that wins the job and has the amazing season last year at Jack State, rushing for over 1,000 yards, throwing for over 2,000 yards. So, don't rule out Max Brown despite some not the best numbers in his college career thus far. He doesn't get recruited to Florida out of high school and go to an SEC program before transferring to Charlotte if he's not a really good quarterback. And you can look at his high school numbers and see his dual threat capabilities, over 1,000 yards rushing, and of course really good numbers passing the football. But of course I had to take to College Football 25 for a little bit of talk about the quarterbacks, and of course I've shared this in a YouTube video, but may as well pull it up here on the podcast side as well. The WVU quarterback rating, because these are the 3 quarterbacks that are probably believed to be in the competition. Don't want to rule out Scotty Fox or Khalil Wilkins, but I think that they will be more in developmental roles at this point in their careers. I think Max Brown may be a little bit behind Jalen Anderson and Nico Marchiol, obviously on paper going in, but we'll see what happens. But hey, this hour College Football 25 sees these guys. If you're watching on the video side, you can see it. But for those listening on the audio side, Max Brown on the video game is a 75 overall rating, and some of his ratings that I picked out here: 82 speed, 83 agility, 83 acceleration, and then he has 92 throw power. And then Jalen Henderson, the other transfer quarterback we brought in from Texas A&M, 78 overall. He has 85 speed, 84 agility, 86 acceleration, and 92 throw power as well. And then Nico Marchiol is a 78 overall on the game, 75 speed, 77 agility, 80 acceleration, and then 93 throw power. So Nico does have the advantage a little bit on the arm side of things, according to the video game, whereas the other guys are better runners. So being the better runners, does that make them a more better fit for the Rich Rod offense? I don't know, because I don't want to sleep on Nico's running ability. I think he's a great runner. He's just not necessarily an explosive runner. He can get you 5 to 10. He just might not get you the 20 to 50 plus yard runs that I think Max Brown or Jalen Henderson could get you, but that doesn't mean he couldn't end up getting the starting job. I think the one advantage that he has is that he does have experience being at WVU, although neither one of these 3 guys has experience in the Rich Rod offense yet, so they're kind of all starting at a similar slate in that. But I did want to take a second and talk about these 3 quarterbacks. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the future for WVU's QB battle, as they've added another quarterback since our last episode in Max Brown, so I wanted to talk about that. But then the other 3 additions, to the transfer portal class were Jason Chambers, which of course ties in to the addition of Rod West as the cornerbacks coach. Jason Chambers sneaks in as a late defensive back addition. And you just got to give a small golf clap to the West Virginia coaching staff for the job they've done to try and revamp the WVU secondary. They obviously saw how bad it was last season, saw everything West Virginia lost, essentially returning no safeties on the roster for the most part and losing a lot of their production at the cornerback position, if you can call it production anyways. They go out and completely rehaul the secondary, bringing in Jordan Walker, Derek Carter, Jordy Scruggs, Fred Perry, Michael Coach Jr., who we talked about as a phenomenal addition last time, William Davis, Devontae Golden Nelson, and then Jason Chambers as well, who I think don't sleep on this addition. Could he be, in that nickel role? Maybe. But also, could he be on the outside role? I think that Michael Coach Jr. can go ahead and pencil him in as a starter on one side. All these other guys battling for, roles on the outside. Maybe some of them will be more safety roles. Some of them will play nickel. But Jason Chambers is a guy you got to look at for that role. I think he had really good PFF numbers when you go look at those and some of the stats he had at Appalachian State. So you like Jason Chambers coming over. And then Keenan Eck, a JUCO addition to the class coming from Citrus College, but looks to be a really explosive pass rusher that just looks like an athletic freak, for lack of a better term. Guy looks like he's 2% body fat, all muscle, and I think he's a guy that will fit, obviously, in the Rich Rod culture and a guy that you can bring in and develop into someone that will play a part on your defense in the future. But speaking of playing a part on the defense in the future, my goodness, did West Virginia maybe save the best for last? Jamori Robinson, the Mountaineers, making a huge addition late in this class. And we've talked about some of the others in the past, how important and impressive they were. None of them may be as impressive as the addition of Jamori Robinson, who gets an extra year, was a guy that was believed to be going to the NFL, was probably going to be a top 3-round draft pick because of the production he had last season at UTSA, where he was named AAC Defensive Player of the Year, 10.5 sacks, 17 TFLs. West Virginia hasn't had a ready-made pass rusher coming in with this experience and this ability as a pass rusher probably since Bruce Irvin, guys. That's what we're talking about here with Jamori Robinson. And if he would have went to the NFL, like I said, like he was believed to be, probably would have been, a day 2 draft pick there in the NFL. Now, if coming over and getting power conference experience, maybe he can improve that draft stock even more at WVU, but the role he's going to play on this defense can't be understated. One of the biggest additions here is Jamori Robinson for West Virginia in this entire transfer portal class that they've made this cycle. He gets the extra year and has the ability to transfer because that JUCO ruling that we talked about in the past that actually affects a lot of these players that West Virginia is bringing in, and they are having that final year because of that ruling. So it really benefited West Virginia to bring in a lot of guys with experience in this class, and Jamori Robinson is one of those. Great grades last season, like I said, Defensive Player of the Year, pass rusher with 1 year of eligibility remaining, was one of the most higher rated players in the portal, especially when it comes to transfer portal, especially when it comes to defensive players that were left in the portal there, and he really did an excellent job there during his time at UTSA, not only as a pass rusher, but don't sleep on him in run defense either. Had an 82.1 run defense grade last season, according to PFF, and then, of course, the pass rushing grade just through the roof at an 86.2, so really he's done a great job, and West Virginia likes his athleticism and thinks he can do a good job if they need to drop him into coverage in this scheme as well. So Jamori Robinson, a huge pickup for this class. You see all the names here, and I'll just read through these really quickly. These are the transfers that joined WVU in this cycle. Like we said, more to come, and we'll see how things shake out in the spring transfer window. But now that the spring semesters began at WVU and spring football is pretty much getting close to being here as they go through winter workouts, we're just a couple of months away now. These are the transfers that have joined WVU. Jordy Scruggs from South Alabama, defensive back. Wide receiver Man Singleton from Eastern Michigan. Offensive lineman Walter Youngbear from Tulsa. Wide receiver Gerard Bowie from Jack State. Tight end Jacob Barrett from Jack State. Quarterback Jalen Henderson from Texas A&M. Wide receiver Cyrus Traw from Youngstown State. Running back L.J. Turner from Catawba College. Linebacker Ashton Woods from UNC. Wide receiver Cam Vaughn from Jack State. Kicker Ethan Head from Tulane. Tight end Johnny Pascuzzi from Iowa. Defensive back Jordan Walker from Chattanooga. Defensive back Derek Carter from Jack State. Defensive back Fred Perry from Jack State. Defensive back Michael Coach Jr. from Nevada. Defensive back Justin Harrington from Washington. Linebacker Chase Wilson from Colorado State. Running back Ty Edwards from Northern Iowa. Offensive lineman Kimo Makanaole from LSU. Defensive end Braden Siders from Wyoming. Offensive lineman Wyatt Minor from Youngstown State. Offensive lineman Robbie Martin from NC State. Defensive back William Davis from Virginia Union. Defensive back Devontae Golden Nelson from Akron. Offensive lineman Tykees Crawford from Arkansas. Quarterback Max Brown from Charlotte. Defensive back Jason Chambers from App State. Defensive lineman Keenan Eck from Citrus College. And linebacker Jamori Robinson from UTSA. So there are the transfer additions West Virginia brought in this cycle as the spring semester started. I think we can finally put a bow on that. But to put a bow on episode 216, let's wrap up with some WVU basketball discussion. I said I wanted to book in with that. Talked about Darian DeVries a little bit, but let's talk about the huge win for the basketball team over the weekend. And that, of course, was the extremely impressive win over the number 2 team in the country, the Iowa State Cyclones. As we talked about earlier, West Virginia has now defeated the number 3 team in the country, the number 7 team in the country, the number 24 team in the country, and the number 2 team in the country. So Darren DeVries in his first 17 games at WVU, 3 top 10 wins, 2 wins over top 3 teams, and Iowa State was on the nation's longest winning streak, a 12-game win streak. Their only loss had been to Auburn, who was previously had been the number 1 team in the country. So that's the type of opponent West Virginia was taking on, but they ran into, just a buzzsaw. Jerry West, they obviously honoring Jerry West in the Coliseum, wearing the throwback uniforms, the presentation, a painting, of course, at halftime, it being announced the retirement of his number across all sports, and of course, you can't tip your cap enough to the coaching job of Darren DeVries yet again. Iowa State was a team that was averaging over 80-some points per game, and West Virginia held them to 57 points. West Virginia's defense has been phenomenal this year. They've been a top 10 defense, I think, as far as scoring defenses in the country prior to this game. This will only help improve that. And West Virginia, of course, utilizes a great game from Javon Small, who I think looks like a Player of the Year candidate, not only in the Big 12 but nationally. You can't say enough about his performance yet again. Put the team on his back down the stretch. I think he scored 12 of the final 13 points and really went on a great run there late to close this out and put the exclamation point on a huge home win. And the Coliseum crowd sounded like it was rocking. Steven, co-host here at the CRW, had the great privilege of being at that one and being in attendance, and he said it was the funnest game he's been at since like 05, 06 seasons. He is what he thought it was. So phenomenal atmosphere, so tip your cap to the West Virginia fan base as well. But let's go over some stats here as West Virginia takes down the number 2 team in the country. Should be popping up in the poll that's probably released today, maybe released already at the time you're hearing this episode or watching this episode. But the Mountaineers, 13-4 overall, now 4-2 in the Big 12 conference, and some of the biggest wins of the college football season, bigger than maybe any other program. Team stats here on this one: 43% for Iowa State, 39 for West Virginia from the field. But one of the best jobs West Virginia did in this game, I think, was their perimeter defense. How they forced Iowa State into just long 3-point shots, contested 3-point shots, great closeouts, great rotations on defense. Iowa State 1 of 17, 6% on 3-point field goal percentage. It's hard to win a game when you shoot 6% from the field. West Virginia hit 9 threes in the game, shot 33%. 85% from the free throw line for Iowa State, 78 for West Virginia. Iowa State out-rebounds the Mountaineers by 10, actually 38-28. Assists, only 4 assists for Iowa State. That's pretty surprising, I think. 9 assists for West Virginia. The Mountaineers get 14 steals. And to me, this was the biggest difference in the game. The way West Virginia took care of the basketball and limited transition opportunities for Iowa State, who was a team that I think coming into the game was really good at fast break points, really good at forcing turnovers and then scoring off those turnovers. West Virginia limits it to single-digit turnovers, which is good enough, but also look at the fast break points. Only 2 for Iowa State and only 11 points off turnovers, even though West Virginia had 9 turnovers. So that, to me, is the difference in the game right there. Those 2 numbers, I think, is what really helped West Virginia win this one. And also, of course, forcing 14 turnovers on Iowa State. Great job by the Mountaineer defense, but you can't speak highly enough here the job the West Virginia defense has done this season. 40 points in the paint for Iowa State, 22 for the Mountaineers. Fouls nearly even, 16-13. Largest lead, 7 for Iowa State, 10-point lead for West Virginia, which actually came in the final seconds of the game with the late run, the late push there, led by none other than Javon Small, who, of course, is my player of the game in this. And before we even talk about the numbers, I'll go ahead and give you my player of the game, because Javon Small is my player of the game and my player of the year, as a matter of fact, for that matter. Can't say enough good things about Javon Small there. Look at his numbers: 27 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 steals. What a game from Javon Small. And, of course, closing it out late with the clutch performance. Javon Small, one of the best players in college basketball this year. Other guys, 5 points, 6 rebounds, 2 steals for Ed Andre, who had a great one late when West Virginia really made that great run late to close this out. Got the steal, and West Virginia did a great job just getting steals and ripping the Iowa State big men in this game. Ed Andre rips him, takes it the length of the court, hits a Euro step, gets the and one, hits the free throw as well. Ed Andre's really done a great job as of late, making key plays, and that was another one. Jonathan Powell, three big shots in this game, 2 big 3-point baskets, one of them coming late. Javon Small kicks it to him, deep 3. He hits it. West Virginia goes up by 1 in the final, I think, 6 or 7 minutes of this game, and West Virginia from then on kind of went on that run. So I think he was kind of a key that sparked that with that big shot. And he's hit some big ones this year. 9 points for him, 2 rebounds, 2 steals for him as well. 2 steals also, and a block shot for Buck Harris. Of course, been our defensive stud, and I think one of his best defensive performances of the season was in this game. 2 points, 5 rebounds, but it wasn't a game where he needed a ton of scoring for him. You needed him to exert all his effort on the defensive end. He did just that. Great job. Of course, Javon Small, we've talked about. Toby Oconee, bit of a bounce back as far as, hitting some more shots, especially hitting the 3-point shot. What I'd love to see from Toby Oconee is just get better on the free throw line, man. We need him to hit those free throws. Struggling in back-to-back games now, struggling this season. I think he's below 50%. But 5 points, 1 steal, 1 block, 1 assist, 1 rebound for Toby. Off the bench, the best bench player in this game, Amani Hansberry, who's looking like he's starting to come into his own again, getting back to maybe 100%. Plays 22 minutes, scores 12 points, hit 4 huge 3-point shots in this game. 6 rebounds. If you can get double-digit scoring from him every game to go along with Javon Small, that's going to be a major key with what West Virginia is dealing with without Tucker DeVries, without Jaden Stone. But 12.6 boards off the bench, huge for Amani Hansberry. KJ Tenner, you look at his stat line, you think not a big impact from him until you see this right here. 3 steals. That's huge for the true freshman playing defense against some of the better guards in the country at Iowa State, or what it had been anyways. So 3 steals. Hats off to KJ Tenner for that performance. And then Joe Yesufu, only 4 points, but 4 points that were huge. 2 free throws, and then late when the final 2 minutes hit one of the go-ahead buckets for West Virginia when they really needed one. He does a great job attacking the basket, and he played a big part in this game as well. And hats off to the coaching job by Darren DeVries. Letting him bring the ball up the court and getting Javon Small off the ball is one reason he was able to get some of his points in the second half. And Joe Yesufu did a great job handling the ball for West Virginia in those moments. Played 21 minutes in this game. 14 steals for the Mountaineers. Can't say enough about that in this game for them. And that's one reason they've been able to win games this season. 13-4 in the year, 4-2 in conference, probably hopping back into the rankings and looking like a tournament team and a team that can be dangerous come March. So shout out to Darren DeVries, mid-season coach of the year, as we talked about here as we bookend the episode with WVU basketball talk. Began it there, and we'll end it there as well as we put a bow on this episode. They deserve our respect and our recognition for the impressive season and surprising season that I don't think anyone saw this much success coming in Darren DeVries' early part of his career with the roster overall he had to endure and the injuries he's had to deal with as well. So great job by the WVU basketball team. Hopefully the success continues moving forward, as it looks like it's going to be a very impressive 2025 initial season for Darren DeVries, which could just be the tip of the iceberg. Can't wait to see what he does throughout his time here at WVU. But speaking of time, my time here is up with you guys, but I appreciate you guys tuning in here to episode 216 of the CRW podcast, where we talk about WVU completing the football coaching staff, threw in a little bit of talk about the transfer additions, and had to talk about some WVU basketball news as well. Appreciate you guys tuning into this one. If you watched on the YouTube side, leave your thoughts in the comments on anything that we've discussed here. Always appreciate those interactions, and be sure hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Before you head out, if you listen on the audio side, be sure to leave the episode a rating, preferably a 5-star one if you would. And yet again, thanks to our good friends at WVSportsNow.com for hosting the episode. And remember, guys, help yourself in 2025. Invest in your mental wealth. Check out Magic Mind. Go to magicmind.com/countryroadsjan. Get 45% off the Magic Mind bundle, guys. Be back next week with another episode to talk more WVU football happenings and WVU sports happenings with you guys. As always, I'm Jorden Cruz. Until next time, let's go Mountaineer.
If you really want to know, then come on, let's go. Take a stroll down those